The deadliest war in human history ended with this. A single flash that erased a city in seconds. Just months earlier, the man who started it all lay dead in a bunker beneath a ruined city. But how did the world get here? How did nations fall so fast? It began here, when German troops stormed Poland, dragging the world into 6 years of devastation. This is the story of World War II. The deadliest conflict in human history. It wasn't just soldiers and tanks. It was entire nations, entire societies, entire ideas, colliding. And when it was over, the world would never be the same. But before we jump into the battles, let's set the stage. Who was fighting who? On one side, the Axis powers. Germany under Adolf Hitler. Italy under Benito Mussolini. And Japan, hungry for domination in Asia. Each had their own ambitions. Hitler wanted to crush Europe. Mussolini dreamed of a new Roman Empire. And Japan wanted to rule the Pacific. Together they promised strength. Together they promised conquest. On the other side, the Allies. Britain and France, who finally said enough. When Germany invaded Poland. China, already fighting Japan for years. The Soviet Union, dragged in after Hitler stabbed Stalin in the back. And the United States, pulled in after Japan struck Pearl Harbor. By 1942, the Big Four stood at the core of the Allies. The US, Britain, the Soviet Union, and China. This was no longer a regional fight. This was global war. It all began on September 1, 1939. German tanks rolled into Poland. And Britain and France said, enough. They declared war on Germany. The world was at war once again. Germany moved fast. With the Soviets attacking from the east, Poland was crushed in weeks. This was the first test of a new German strategy called Blitzkrieg or lightning war. Instead of slow trench fighting like in World War I, Blitzkrieg meant using tanks, planes, and fast-moving troops all at once, to overwhelm opponents before they could react. And then, quiet. On the Western Front, Britain and France waited. For 8 long months, almost nothing happened. The press called it the phony war. But the calm was a lie. In 1940, the storm broke. Germany smashed through Denmark, Norway, Belgium, the Netherlands, and finally, France. The French army collapsed in just 6 weeks. At Dunkirk, more than 300,000 soldiers were trapped on the beaches. But in a desperate, miraculous evacuation, they escaped across the Channel. France surrendered, and Britain now stood alone. Hitler tried to bomb Britain into submission. Night after night, the Blitz rained fire on London. But the Royal Air Force fought back. And Hitler was stopped for the very first time. But Hitler wasn't finished. In June 1941, he launched the largest invasion in history, Operation Barbarossa. 3 million German troops stormed into the Soviet Union. The Red Army reeled, but they refused to break. Meanwhile in Asia, Japan struck. On December 7, 1941, Japanese planes roared over Pearl Harbor. Explosions tore through the U.S. fleet. Over 2,000 Americans were killed. The next day the United States declared war. Days later, Germany and Italy declared war on America. The war was no longer European. It was everywhere. By 1942, it looked like the Axis might actually win. German troops reached Stalingrad. Rommel's Afrika Korps pushed deep into Egypt. Japan's empire stretched across the Pacific. But that year, everything began to change. At Midway, American carriers ambushed the Japanese fleet. 4 carriers sunk. Japan's advance was stopped cold. At El Alamein in Egypt, the Allies finally halted Rommel's advance. Winston Churchill called it the end of the beginning. And in Stalingrad, Soviet defenders clung to every street, every building. The Germans were encircled. The mighty Sixth Army was destroyed. It was the beginning of the end for Hitler. Now the Allies struck back. They invaded Sicily. Then mainland Italy. Mussolini was overthrown. In the east, the Soviets launched wave after wave, driving the Germans backward. In the skies, Allied bombers hammered German factories and cities. And then D-Day. June 6, 1944. The largest seaborne invasion in history. Over 150,000 Allied troops stormed the beaches of Normandy. Under fire, against all odds, they broke through. By August, Paris was liberated. Germany was trapped, squeezed from the west by the Allies and from the east by the Soviets. By April, the Red Army had reached Berlin. The city burned. And in a bunker underground, Adolf Hitler killed himself. On May 8, Germany surrendered. Victory in Europe. But in the Pacific, the war raged on. At Iwo Jima. At Okinawa. The fighting was brutal. Japanese soldiers refused to surrender. Kamikaze pilots crashed their planes into Allied ships. An invasion of Japan loomed, and it promised to be catastrophic. Then came a terrible new weapon. On August 6, 1945, the US dropped an atomic bomb on Hiroshima. And the message could not have been clearer: the war was over. But Japan didn't surrender. 3 days later, another on Nagasaki. The devastation was beyond imagining. Japan finally surrendered. World War II was over. But the cost was almost unthinkable. Over 60 million lives lost. Entire cities reduced to rubble. And the horror of the Holocaust, the systematic murder of 6 million Jews and millions of others. The world could never go back to what it was. Two superpowers emerged, the United States and the Soviet Union. The Cold War began. The United Nations was founded, in a desperate attempt to prevent such destruction from ever happening again. And humanity entered the nuclear age.